On Sky News Australia, this is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, Australians reject the Albanese government's record immigration intake. Labor power brokers are fearing a backlash from Muslim constituents in key Western Sydney seats. We've got Ami Horowitz with the latest from the US, including a college professor getting a taste of his own woke medicine. Kinsey Schofield will join me with the latest royal and celebrity news, and she'll tell us why Oprah is in the crosshairs. And Patrick Carline with all the day's big local news. And of course, there's always a decent dose of lefties losing it. Tonight featuring a British TV host who refused to mangle the English language to pander to a non-binary activist who identifies as they, them.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thanks.
You know my pronouns are they, them. How are you doing?
Yeah. Thank you for telling me your pronouns. I use correct grammar. You don't get to require me to use incorrect grammar and factually incorrect things. You're not a plural. You're a one person. And you're a female person, so I will use she and her. Thank you very much.
Do what you like, I guess.
Well, there you are. You didn't need to tell me then, did you?
Maybe I'm just making sure people know in case they're watching and they want to refer to me respectfully.
Is it disrespectful for me to use correct factual grammar?
Before I bring in Patrick Carline, let's have a look at the latest data from the Australian Population Research Institute. And the results here should serve as a big wake-up call for big Australia advocates. The Albanese government's record migration intake is proving to be hugely unpopular. We are setting records. Australia added more than 500,000 people last year alone. But the latest research shows most of us are not on board with this strategy. 71% of voters say Australia does not need more people. More than 70% say that more people coming to Australia will push up the cost of housing. That's pretty obvious. 49% of voters want drastic cuts to immigration levels. And now this is a disturbing revelation. 48% of voters also said they see themselves as financially insecure. This is that they are just getting by, surviving financially and really finding it difficult to make ends meet. Only 14% of those surveyed said that they were living comfortably. This survey also looked into the sense of belonging, and the data should again be a cause for concern. There are far too many people who live in this country who feel no connection to Australia, including plenty who were born and bred here. This self-loathing, this anti-Australia sentiment that has been fed to kids from kindergarten all the way to university is having a profound impact. While older Australians feel a deep connection to the country, 77% of those aged 60 to 74 said they felt a sense of belonging to Australia to a great extent. That number plummets to just 32% for voters aged 18 to 29. So you've got 2 in 3 under 30s who don't feel that connection, that allegiance, that sense of pride in their own country. You think that's not going to have disastrous implications in the years to come? Joining me now is senior columnist for the Herald Sun, Patrick Carline. Patrick, the data from the Australian Population Research Institute is clear, but I do wonder, is anyone in the Albanese government listening, or indeed the coalition, because they've backed big Australia policies in the past as well?
Well, I think you touch on something there. This discussion, if you like, or a debate has been handicapped for many, many years by the fact that anyone who puts their hand up and says, hang on, maybe less, maybe we've got too many coming, is risking being labelled a racist or anti-multicultural or whatever. And this is it's such an important policy lever, immigration. We're at record levels. We're lacking we're lacking housing, we're lacking infrastructure. People are worried about access to the healthcare system. It's such an important discussion that goes to who we are. And it's just a really great pity that we can't talk about it plainly in a way that makes sense.
Absolutely, and it's one of the advantages of being an island nation with secure borders now is that we can control our migration. We can say this is the optimum level and work towards it, but there doesn't seem to be that sort of discussion. And I think it's fair enough to say there's not only economic reasons why you don't want to have 500,000 people coming in every year, wages, housing, infrastructure, but there's also all sorts of social issues about assimilation and whether people coming here share Australian values. And I think that's a fair enough discussion to have as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you talked earlier about a sense of belonging. Immigrants should be feeling united as Australians in a way that we haven't seen so much in recent months. We're looking at unprecedented times lately. At times, Australia feels like tribes battling out over ancient hostilities in a way that we don't feel united in the way that we probably should.
Absolutely, yeah. You've got that with the referendum last year, and certainly since October 7 with different segments of the community. Now, let's talk about the Prime Minister's announcement of the A Future Made in Australia Act. This is going to carve out a greater role for the government in the economy. That's can't see any problems there, Patrick. No. It's part of Anthony Albanese's plan for a second term. He wants to drive investment, but should voters be trusting this election agenda? Remember last time around, he was on the front page of the Daily Telegraph telling us, I'm not woke. Remember how he promised his government was going to be the party of mainstream Australia, not the woke left? Well, that didn't work out too well, has it? He's again and again shown that his government is radically left, from the Indigenous voice referendum to its position on Israel. Patrick, what do you make of this Future Made in Australia Strategy Act?
I think, firstly, it'd be good to have a government that's concentrating on the first term. There are a lot of realities that we should be looking at in the first term, whether you're looking at clean energy, renewables targets and those sorts of things. They're years and years behind. This speech is full of empty sort of motherhood statements. It talks about creating opportunities. It's empty rhetoric. It doesn't actually mean anything. It touches on some things that obviously are important. The world has changed. National security, economic security, they have converged. It is a changing world. But there was nothing from what I read in this speech that actually sort of addressed that. There was no meat on the bone. It was a speech that belongs on the hustings rather than...
Yes, motherhood statements, that you're right. But, just the whole notion of big government worries me. More government involvement in these areas. I'd like to see less. I think that works much better. Now, let's talk about the Labor power brokers being really worried about what is happening with segments of the Muslim population and whether there's going to be a backlash at the next election. The Australian reports that they fear that key Western Sydney heartland seats could turn against Labor if they seem to be too soft on Israel. But the question is, Patrick, where will these voters go? The Greens may be virulently anti-Israel, but their other policies, particularly their social policies, their LGBTQIA plus policies, are frankly quite abhorrent to that segment. So are Labor jumping at shadows here, worried that these voters are going to desert them? We've got compulsory voting, so they have to show up to vote. They know the coalition is pro-Israel. Is their Greens anti-Israel stance enough to get them across the line? Are they going to be one topic election?
Well, I think it depends on which seats you're looking at. If you look at Western Sydney, obviously there are large Muslim populations there, and I think you could argue there's certainly been symbols of the Albanese government sort of pandering to those sort of election type concerns. I think at the last election, 6 of the 10 Labor seats that swung most wildly against them were actually seats with large Muslim populations.
Sure.
Look, are they jumping at shadows? Perhaps not. We will see. But the Greens have been very good and very savvy, despite some of their stranger policies, in actually casting themselves as an alternative to Labor. And I can see why they are worried about that.
And that was in that polling I referenced earlier in the program. They were getting a lot of those younger voters. They weren't turning off the coalition towards Labor. They were going straight to the Greens. Now, let's talk some footy. I know you're a Richmond fan.
Richmond, yes.
Oh dear. Now, the AFL has handed a 3-week suspension to a Port Adelaide player for a homophobic slur. He did apologise, owned up to it straight away, but even the 3-week suspension is not enough, according to some LGBTQIA+ activists. They want a 6-game ban. Angie Green, Chief Executive of Stand Up, said, "Sadly, I think the punishment is super predictable in the way it reflects how the AFL and society in general treat casual homophobia and homophobia in general." She claims the homophobic slur is the same as the N-word. I would disagree with that quite strongly. But 3 weeks to me is a very harsh penalty indeed. You could argue a fine would have been fitting in such an instance. It was a first offence. But it seems some are never satisfied. I mean, this poor kid has had the entire football industry against him. Every pundit has been advocating for him to be suspended. I fear for his mental health right now more so than anything else. But it just shows you this twisted priority in the footy world, where just a week ago we heard about this systematic doping program, essentially, where they were doing tests before match day and then having some players fake injuries to avoid a World Anti-Doping Agency strike. And Dick Pound likened that to the East Germans and the Russians in the 70s and 80s, as bad as you can get. That story seems to have caused little concern to most of the footy world, but a player saying something terrible and stupid, yes, seems to be the worst thing that's happened in football all year.
Well, he's an easy target, isn't he? I mean, look, he did the wrong thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, everybody agrees he
yeah.
did the wrong thing. There should be some sort of, sanction against that. I think if he got 1 week or 10 weeks, there'd be people who would be arguing this is wrong, this is unfair. It's one of those sort of easy ones where everybody agrees the wrong thing was done. He put up his hand. I think the big lesson really was for the AFL. I mean, he put up his hand on the same night. There didn't need to be an investigation, as they called it, and it's dragged out all through this week. It's what everybody's talking about as the AFL issue. It didn't need to. It could have been knocked on the head on Monday quite easily.
Absolutely. And the penalty, 3 weeks, when you look at what some other players have copped in the last couple of years, again, this is the hypocrisy of the AFL, because they talk about just how progressive they are and what wonderful corporate citizens they are. They have a Pride round, which Sydney leads every year. That's Sydney St Kilda game. Sydney is also sponsored by Qatar Airways. Now, you don't need to dig too deep to know what the attitudes and the laws against homophobia are in Qatar. Qatar, a state-sponsored airline. Again, that seems to be completely acceptable. There seems to that cause nobody any issues that a company like Qatar is sponsoring the Sydney Swans, but you've got a player saying something stupid, and it's the worst crime against the LGBT community in Australia.
Look, I think poor Jeremy Finlayson has become the sweet spot sort of culprit, if you like. I mean, he's an easy one to kick to the curb. You talk about Qatar Airlines and Sydney. I think you make a very good point, but it's sort of people don't want to go there, do they?
Well, that one's a bit difficult. That one where you actually have to leave some skin in the game. You may have to give up some sponsorship dollars, but this is easy. This is just one where everyone can agree something terrible has happened, and let's just completely try to destroy this young man. Now let's talk about a very amusing story. This was in Mamma Mia, and I don't often read Mamma Mia, but this was brought to my attention, and I don't know, I found it enormously amusing. An anonymous author, I don't know why she didn't put her name to this, has written that podcast giant Joe Rogan is the Camilla Parker Bowles in her marriage. He's the third unwanted person. Since her husband started listening to Rogan, He apparently has, and I quote here, developed a deep distrust of science and government. He stopped taking the COVID boosters early on. Oh no, this is dangerous. Now let's keep going. She also writes, but it appears that for Rogan and those who follow him, the political is personal. My husband will often get angry about what he calls woke activists and how they are going too far. When he says the word feminist, he reduces it to a dirty word. And boy, does he get angry about trans activists, something Rogan has covered on his show. He will get fired up about children using puberty blockers and that pronouns should be he if you have a penis and she if you have a vagina. Well, I don't know, Patrick. The husband appears to be pretty damn normal. I think the wife, though, is harsh.
Possibly harsh. I think if this couple doesn't drink, they should start. I think they should sit down each night with a cab sav or a shardy or whatever and talk about anything except politics. Have no-go zones.
But fancy blaming Joe Rogan for a grown man who's obviously married. You know, we're not talking about a teenager here, having opinions that this woman does not agree with. Oh, my God. Patrick Carline, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time this evening. A bombshell report into transgender medicine for children is being lauded as a watershed moment in the UK. Leading consultant Dr. Hilary Cass handed down her report into gender-affirming treatment in the UK's National Health Service, stressing that the dangers of thousands of vulnerable children obtaining treatments based on remarkably weak evidence. Now, our own Prime Minister is under pressure to replicate this review in Australia. The National Association of Practicing Psychiatrists is among groups urging an investigation into the use of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones in children. One man who's been campaigning for this review is Libertarian MP David Limbrick, and he joins me now. David, tell me about the significance of the Cass report.
It really is a landmark report, like you said in your opening statement. Some of the things that Hilary Cass has gone through in quite a detailed manner is she said straight up that there's no good evidence that puberty blockers reduce suicidality in children. There's nothing really known about the long-term harms of these drugs. Doctors can't tell at an early age. They can't easily diagnose which children will continue being trans and which won't. And basically the whole science base that this is based on is really, really weak. And in the UK, they're stopping using this sort of medicine for children. And we're in the situation in Australia where in Victoria, we have these laws that basically enforce an affirmation-only approach, which means we couldn't go down the same path as what England's doing at the moment. And so I think, we've been calling for a review for a while. We need some sort of review in Australia similar to the Cass review.
Absolutely, and we seem to have so little transparency in this country compared to the US and the UK. The Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne is named a couple of times in this report. What do we know about what's happening at gender clinics in children's hospitals throughout the country?
Yeah, you're right. It was named in the report. I think it's named in it. They have a table which looks at clinical guidelines, and I think I'd describe it as an unflattering view of what they do. We know that there's been an explosion in the number of children that have been referred to these clinics in Australia, in particular in Melbourne. But as the Cass review stated, we've got a similar situation here. We don't really have a good understanding of the reasons why they've been referred. And similarly to the UK, a very large proportion of these are girls.
And you've got that issue of social contagion with girls and so many other mental health issues. And again, there seems to be just revelations in recent months about the connectedness there, the fact that so many of these girls have pre-existing issues, and this is almost a result of that. Or for many of them, if they're left alone, the issues resolve themselves if you don't set them down the path of gender-affirming care.
Yeah, I mean, many of these children that were examined in the Cass review, they had other underlying conditions such as autism spectrum disorder or a history of trauma.
Yep.
And so there's many interconnected issues here. And just sending them down this medicalised path of giving them cross-sex hormones and things like this seems really irresponsible, especially after what's happened with the Cass review.
That's it. And there has been research on that the kids who are gender confused, if you just leave them alone, let them be, a lot of that gender confusion sorts itself out as they grow up. Now, the Giggle versus Tickle federal court case continues as Giggle for Girls app founder Sal Grover fights a discrimination case brought against her by a transgender activist who was barred from her app on the grounds of being of the wrong sex. Outside the federal court this week, there have been protests from the trans lobby, and I like this comment from MP John Ruddick, who asked, as you look at this footage, how can such a tiny fringe group be so politically empowered? And they really do exercise disproportionate power and influence, not just politically, but in the media, in the corporate world. How did we get here, David?
I think the Cass review actually outlined some of these things. The fact that so many of these doctors were scared to talk about things indicates that there's a really serious political influence. And, at these protests, when women want to go and speak, the objective of counter-protesters and these activists is to silence people. They want to shut them up. And when you've got a situation where people can't have open discussions about things, then you've really got a situation where ideology has taken hold, and we're not talking about medicine or rationality anymore. Yeah. We're talking about ideology.
Well, this is the problem here, because this is the field of medicine, but so much of what has happened is not based on science or research. It's based on ideology and activism and junk data. And here we are. You've tried to get a review happening in Victoria. What's the status of that? With this Cass report, is there a chance that it's going to be something that the Labor government will consider?
I think eventually they'll have no choice. They'll have to do something. We can't just continue on in the dark in Victoria and look at the rest of the world as if it's not happening, like as if what's happening in the UK is irrelevant to us. There's already activists coming out and attacking the Cass review's integrity, which I think is a bit much, because it's probably one of the most detailed reviews that we've ever seen in this space, and it's damning.
Absolutely damning. David Limbrick, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Still to come, Army Horowitz debunks the reporting around a police shooting that some are using to start another BLM-style race riot. Plus, a leftist academic gets a taste of his own medicine. Plus, plenty of lefties losing it. Welcome back. Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's start with the wonderful Julia Hartley-Brewer, who has had enough of the excessive demands of the LGBTQIA+++ lobby and flat out refused to deliberately mangle the English language to pander to an individual who identifies as a non-binary plural. Enjoy.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thanks.
You know my pronouns are they, them. How are you doing?
Yeah. Thank you for telling me your pronouns. I use correct grammar, so the only thing I would need to refer you to is to your face would be you. But I'm not being rude. You can choose your pronouns. You can choose what you want to call yourself, but you don't get to require me to use incorrect grammar and factually incorrect things. You're not a plural. You're a one person, and you're a female person. So I will use she and her. Thank you very much.
Do what you like, I guess.
Well, there you are. You didn't need to tell me then, did you?
Maybe I'm just making sure people know in case they're watching and they want to refer to me respectfully.
Is it disrespectful for me to use correct factual grammar?
It's not incorrect or unfactual grammar to use singular they them pronouns for an individual. But we're here to talk about the Cass review.
Yeah, but you chose to bring it up.
You chose to use the incorrect pronouns for me.
I chose to use the correct pronouns for a single woman who is appearing on my show.
I'm not a single woman, though. I'm a very special non-binary trans person, as you just pointed out. I
didn't
really
just point that
out.
out. I didn't just point that out. I introduced you as a journalist and a Virgin Radio presenter.
No, just before I came on, you were talking about how people with all these labels like to be special. And I'm just making sure that everyone knows I'm special.
Oh, love, you ain't special. You're just a giant, irritating pain in the butt. And talking about irritating, self-delighted lefties, let's have a look at MSNBC's Nicole Wallace, whose Trump derangement syndrome is causing her to sound a little bit fascist.
So you believe his policies, just what he said out loud, let alone what he does if he's there again, are catastrophic, that his foreign policy that he carried out while you were there was corrupt. What is your plan for making sure he's never president?
What is your plan for making sure Trump is never president? Yikes, lady, we normally let the people decide. That's how democracy works. Or does it? Let's get a definition from the Veep. Take it away, Kamala.
It's important to see that, you know, the nature of democracy, there's a duality to it. It has two sides to it. On the one hand, there's incredible strength, right? That when a democracy is intact, what it does for its people, in terms of the strength it gives its people and protects in terms of individual freedoms and rights, right? And liberties. There's an incredible strength in that, what it does for its people when it is intact. On the other hand, democracy, extraordinarily fragile.
Yeah.
It's only as strong as our willingness to fight for it. That's by nature what a democracy is. It is about the people.
The most incoherent person in the White House, and that includes the 80-year-old with obvious cognitive decline. Now, this clip I call instant karma. He is a Berkeley professor. He gets a taste of his own medicine, a taste of the craziness leftist academics have unleashed on society. He invited law students to his home, and then they refused to leave, started doing a protest and calling everyone Zionists.
Not only from its legal substance, not only from its legal substance. We have attorneys. We have attorneys.
Okay, you don't have to get
Excuse
aggressive.
me.
Please
leave
our house. You are guests at our house.
This is our First Amendment right.
No,
This is my house.
Now let's enjoy this classic from Army Horowitz, who'll be joining me in a second. He talked to some lefty folk who seem to think black people are too poor or too stupid to get ID. What a wildly racist point of view, but it's one that has been normalised by the Democrats. Watch this clip for the liberal white folk perspective, followed by black folk who know better.
Do you have an opinion on voter ID laws?
Yeah, they're usually pretty racist and they're bad. I think voter ID laws are a way to perpetuate racism.
Do you think it suppresses the African American vote?
Definitely, because they're less likely to have state IDs.
You can always get IDs you do over the internet. Does that also make it difficult for black people in particular?
Yeah, you have to have access to the internet. You have to be able to pay an internet service provider for certain fees.
Do you think that's harder for black people to go online?
Well, I feel like they don't have the knowledge of how it works.
Now I'm here in East Harlem to ask black people their thoughts on what you just heard. Do you carry ID?
Yes, I do.
Do you know any black person who doesn't carry ID?
No. Why would they think we don't have ID?
That's a lie. Why would they say that?
Do you have ID?
Yes.
Everybody that I know have ID. Like, that's one of the things you need to walk around with New York with.
Do you have a problem if when you go to vote, if they say, could we please just see your ID to make sure you are who you say you are? Do you have an issue with that?
No.
Another shooting of a black man by police officers in the US has the usual media outlets race baiting. It's like they're trying to engineer a repeat of the BLM race riots. Look at this Washington Post report using a picture of Dexter Reed graduating, not his mugshot. And they also report here about how Chicago police fired 96 shots in 41 seconds, killing a black man named Dexter Reed during a traffic stop. CBS reports the head of Chicago Police Oversight Agency wants the officers responsible for the shooting stripped of their powers after she was asked whether this shooting proves there's a pattern of officers using the cover of a traffic stop to achieve other means or ends. Dexter Reed's family says he was killed for driving around in his car.
He had just bought his new car 3 days before that, and he was just riding around in his car. He said, Mom, I'm going for a ride. and they killed him.
But the footage of the shooting seems to show something entirely different. If you watch the whole thing, it seems pretty clear that after being pulled over for a trivial traffic offence, this thug opened fire on police. First, an officer was shot. Did he really expect police not to fire back? Let's bring in journalist and filmmaker Ami Horowitz. Ami, it's an election year. I guess some in the media are wanting to ramp up racial division, but this is just so reckless to be pushing this as some sort of a racist incident.
Yeah, you stole some of my thunder, Rita, because I was going to read to you a bunch of other headlines. So I went through basically all the headlines from all the major media outlets. And I could have CNN, ABC, NBC, NPR. And yes, none of them talked about in the headline that he was shooting back at police officers. No, they are in trying to create racial foment. That's exactly what they're trying to do. But the truth is, if we're being honest, it's not really because of the election. They've been doing this for years. The entire Black Lives Matter movement is based on a lie. The idea that there is tons of unarmed Black people being shot by police all the time. You know, obviously, you've had me on videos that I've done on this exact topic. And, you know, when you ask people, if you ask Black people who had these protests or white people these protests, you ask them, how many unarmed Black people have been shot in the last year? Their answer are in the hundreds, in the thousands. Well, guess what? It averages between 13 and 16 people who are unarmed, shot by the police. But Rita, right before I came on, because I do work before I come on your show, I went through the 16 unarmed Black killings by police officers in 2023. And guess what? With almost out exception, every single one of them, if you look at them and you look at the police reports, and if you look at the actual local reporting, there was a reason why they were shot. They were trying to run over the police officer. They wouldn't listen to the police officer's instructions. The police officer felt threatened. So even those 16, if you break them down, almost all of them had something involved, which is why it was justified for the shooting. Yet, they don't talk about, even the Washington Post, which has this database that I went through, their headlines are all about racial shootings, inequality in shootings. Even the deposit of this information that I went to was skewing their own data. It's crazy, Rita.
It is, and it is so reckless, like you said. We saw those BLM riots through 2020. The people were killed. People were bashed, people had their homes, their businesses burnt down. It was just shocking levels of violence, and I'd argue race relations in the US right now are far worse than they were in the 90s. There's just this heightened fear and loathing that seems to exist now. I want to ask you about the parents of a school shooter being sentenced to 10 years in prison for failing to take steps to prevent their child's killing. Their child went on to kill 4 students in 2021. Why aren't we seeing this happen more often? I know that this has caused a lot of debate, but we're seeing plenty of gangbangers, teenage gangbangers out there, repeat offenders who are responsible for extreme violence. Why aren't we routinely seeing parents charged?
Yeah, you know, this is an interesting topic because I think it cuts across any kind of political positioning on this, right? I don't think there is a right-wing or left-wing position on this particular issue, and I like that. Look, I think that the parents have to have some responsibility, right? I mean, this is a child that they're raising, that they have involvement in, and they need to be more involved in their lives. When you walk away from a child's life, look, you can expect bad things to happen. So I think look, I don't know. 10 years sounds like a lot to me, just off, kind of looking at that from an outsider's perspective. That sounds a little harsh, but there certainly has to be some kind of repercussions, some kind of responsibility for the parents as well, because that's the only, I think that's if you want to ask me, how are we going to cut down on these shootings, whether it be a shooting in the inner city or some kind of mass school shooting, it's more parental involvement. I think that's really the best solution. It's not a perfect solution. It's not going to answer all the problems, but I think having parents more involved, I think just makes sense. It would cut these numbers down, no question about it.
Now let's talk about the University of California in Berkeley, a breeding ground for radical leftists for decades. But this week, the academics who push this agenda, the social justice warriors who have really emboldened these students for so long, got a taste of their own medicine army. What was supposed to be a celebratory dinner at Lord Dean Erwin Chemerinsky's home turned into an angry pro-Palestinian demonstration after some of these invited guests hijacked the event and turned it into an anti-Israeli sermon, and they refused to leave. Let's have a quick look.
Fast. Not only from Israel, fast. Not only from Israel. Fast. We have attorneys. We have attorneys.
Okay, you don't have to get
Excuse me.
Please leave our house. You are guests at our house.
The Lord Dean released a statement saying, "I'm enormously sad that we have students who are so rude as to come into my home in my backyard and use this social occasion for their political agenda." But Army, I am having trouble feeling too much sympathy here because these academics have helped create this ugliness and it's been unleashed on society. They shouldn't be surprised when it shows up on their doorstep.
Oh, Rita, I love this story. I think the word Schadenfreude was invented for this particular moment in time on television, Rita. That's why the word was created by some German dude. Oh, yeah, well, sorry, the revolution eats its own. It always has, it always will. Guess what? You guys just saw the pointy end of the spear, my friend. Look, this is look, you just played a video of mine from Berkeley. I spent a lot of time on the Berkeley campus. This is a campus which has been anti-Israel, anti-Semitic for years, and professors and deans like him, I'm sorry, you have fomented that. You have fed this. Look, I will say this, that, and again, this anti-Israel bias is not simply just anti-Israel. It bleeds, bleed may be understating it, into anti-Semitism. Look, this group that was protesting this dinner actually had on their poster a picture of the dean, a Jewish dean, eating with a knife and fork with blood dripping down from it. It was just, the whole thing was, and I'm using this intently, dripping with anti-Semitism and blood libel. It was disgusting. It was gross. But I'm sorry, Dean. But this particular dean, so you know, this particular dean was pushing for schools and agreed with schools that would ban Zionist speakers. So I'm sorry if I don't feel 1 ounce of sympathy for you. Not 1 ounce.
I'm right there with you, Army Horowitz, right there with you. This is just a delicious bit of instant karma. Hopefully it wakes them up, but we'll see. I don't think so. I think they're so deep in this ideology that even this isn't going to wake them up. Army Horowitz, thank you so much for your time. Still to come, another celebrity child changes their gender in another worrying example of social contagion among teens. Kinsey Schofield joins me next with the latest celebrity and royal news. Welcome back. Author Abigail Shrier has written and spoken extensively about social contagion and rising incidents of teenagers identifying as trans. And that social contagion doesn't just happen in schools and online, it can happen in households. Actor Ben Affleck's daughter, a child formerly known as Seraphina Rose Affleck, is now non-binary Finn Affleck. And who has Finn been spending a lot of time with? Well, new step-sibling, Emmy, the daughter of Ben's new wife, Jennifer Lopez, who also goes by gender-neutral pronouns and identifies as non-binary. Coincidence? Regular celebrity tomfoolery, or another example of social contagion? Who knows? Joining me now is showbiz and royal reporter Kinsey Schofield. Kinsey, there are so many non-binary and trans children in Hollywood, certainly a lot more than the general population, it seems. Many of them very young, including children of Charlize Theron, Cher, Jamie Lee Curtis, Cynthia Nixon, Sigourney Weaver, and many, many others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first time I believe the media paid attention to it was perhaps Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt's daughter Shiloh. And then recently we've seen Megan Fox and Brian Austin Green defend, the fact that their young boys like to dress in girls' clothes and princess costumes. So you're right, we are seeing it happen much more often than we used to.
Absolutely. And I think with Shiloh, they just let her be if she wanted to be a bit of a tomboy. And she's very comfortable, from what I understand from the latest reports, being a girl. So it was a phase she went through, and she's out the other side. I don't think they socially or medically took any measures to transition her. So it will be interesting to see what's happening in Hollywood with this phenomenon, because it seems to be happening there disproportionately. Now, let's talk about Netflix releasing a new film, Scoop, based on the inside story behind Prince Andrew's disastrous interview with the BBC about his friendship with sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Let's have a look.
So I'm just saying that's the story. And it doesn't change unless you change it, unless you tell us a different story. Your story in your voice.
I really don't understand why everyone's so obsessed with my friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. I knew Jimmy Savile so much better.
Certainly looks like him. The film is based on the story as told by TV booker Sam McAllister, who got the Prince to sit down for an interview. And Kinsey, it's already got some people feeling sympathy for the Prince. Not me. Tell me about how what impact this film's going to have for the royals.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think ultimately this is horrible PR-wise, because you're introducing an entire new generation to the Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein scandal, a generation that was hooked on the "Where is Kate?" obsession, that's now getting their hands onto them a brand new royal scandal to get all worked up about. Specifically, they have a scene where Princess Beatrice is sitting next to her father and negotiating this interview and saying, you know what? I've looked you up online. People are saying horrible things. Maybe we should do this. I highly doubt she appreciates her part in the film, but great reviews critically. But I think PR-wise, it's going to be hard for the royal family to sit back and watch this revisited not once, Rita, but twice, because Amazon is releasing a similar production called A Very Royal Scandal, which will cover this exact same thing.
Yeah, it's going to be a difficult period. There's no way around it. There are so many unanswered questions with this saga, and it's ugly. It's undoubtedly ugly. Now, Prince Harry's US visa application has been handed over to a judge. His drug use, as admitted to in his memoir Spare, is the subject of a high-profile lawsuit brought by a conservative think tank in the US. He's fighting to stop the release of these documents. Does this latest update suggest they could be made public?
Absolutely. I mean, so what we know about the Heritage Foundation's pursuit is that they want to know whether or not Prince Harry received special treatment or if he lied on his application. The judge said, I need to see what's inside of this paperwork to determine whether or not this should be released to the public. Is this, a value to American citizens? Why would they care? So the judge, right now, Rita, he could be, flipping through this paperwork. And I do believe if Prince Harry lied on his visa application, it will be made public. Ultimately, if Prince Harry lied, he could be booted out of the United States under a Trump administration. I do not believe a Biden administration is going to, give him any trouble. Since we've been talking, 5,000 people have crossed the Arizona border, so I think he's safe. But under a Trump administration, I think Prince Harry should be pretty worried.
Well, he should be worried because Trump has already commented on this. He's not a fan, and he's not a fan of the double standards. So he could be in trouble. Can you imagine that story if Prince Harry is deported from America? Wow. We'll be talking about that for weeks if that happens. Talking about Prince Harry and Meghan have once again tried to make political moves in the US. Apparently, they are supporting this bipartisan coalition with support from Hollywood power players to prepare US voters for a possible deepfake onslaught as the campaign year goes into high gear. I mean, come on. I mean, these two should just stay out of this stuff. Anything to do with politics, so-called disinformation, misinformation, particularly given the disinformation this couple has put out there. I mean, we all remember the Oprah interview.
Well, you know, I have a hard time believing that it's bipartisan when it's run by Miles Taylor, who it's the future us. Miles Taylor is a notorious anti-Trumper. So bipartisan makes me laugh. But you're right, against disinformation. I'm not taking any advice from Prince Harry on disinformation. This is a man who thought he was on the phone with Greta Thunberg for half an hour talking about his private life and politics. And it was YouTube pranksters that broadcast it on YouTube. So when it comes to disinformation, Prince Harry is not an expert.
No, I completely forgot about that. You know what? There is such saturation with this couple. They're in the media so often that you forget some of this stuff. The whole Greta Thunberg deep fake, that was hilarious. Now, I mentioned Oprah, and she is the star of People Magazine's 50th anniversary special issue this week. Has a glowing piece about her and her amazing career. It certainly was an amazing career. But when she turned 70 in January, it was hard not to notice, Kinsey, that the attitude to Oprah has shifted. She used to be universally admired, but now there are people who are having shots saying her squeaky clean image isn't what it seems. Her friendship with Harvey Weinstein certainly raised some eyebrows, but also there's been accusations that she's been responsible for having people cancelled and just not being the kind, giving Oprah that we are used to seeing on our TV screens. Is this all to do with her becoming more and more political, or is there something deeper going on here?
Yeah, because my initial reaction to this story is I think you saw a lot of people turn their backs on Oprah Winfrey when she endorsed Barack Obama before he even announced that he was running for president. I mean, she really inserted herself into that campaign. And I mean, multiple economists have stated that there's no way he would have received the amount of votes that he did without that endorsement. And it really shifted her into a new light. And I think most recently people have a bit of disdain for her, because you look at that Meghan Markle interview that you mentioned earlier, and Oprah looks like an opportunist. I mean, there was no pushback, there was no follow-up, and it just felt like this was Oprah taking it. I mean, it felt like it was Oprah taking advantage of a really toxic family internal situation. Think back on Chris Rock's great stand-up where he was like, this is just in-law stuff. I'm paraphrasing. But, you know, it just felt like Oprah Winfrey taking advantage of something really toxic. And, you know, she kind of comes off as a snake oil salesman today, you know, telling everybody she's doing Weight Watchers 1 second and then doing an Ozempic special 30 days later. I just think people don't trust her the way that they used to.
And I think that's the key word, trust, because trust with her was so high. People just religiously believed whatever she said, any product she endorsed, any positions she took, but that trust seems to have fallen significantly. Kinsey Schofield, thank you so much for your time tonight. That's it from me tonight. I'll see you Sunday morning for Outsiders. Up next is Newsnight.